Good afternoon. I welcome all the students of Postgraduate Diploma in Audio Program Production to this teleconferencing session. Today we have selected a very important topic for discussion, that is communication strategies on HIV/AIDS. We have invited a very senior communication expert to our studios today to discuss the topic with you, and I hope it will be very informative and educative for all of you to understand how to use various media, especially radio, for generating awareness and also using it for support and care. Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, who is an expert with NACO and Oxfam, is here with us today. I welcome you, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar.
Thank you very much.
And my first question to you is, why women and why rural women at all? Why you have selected this particular segment for reaching out and generating awareness? Because as it is, AIDS is a very, very sensitive issue. And to reach out to women to generate awareness and seek their opinion and so many things involved with it. Why this particular segment?
I think that's the core of the issue, and it's good that we take that into perspective in the beginning. Let me give you a little background so that the context is correct as far as this particular session is concerned. As you know, HIV started in 1986 in India, first case in Chennai, and today, after the revision of numbers, we'll not get into the issue of methodologies and corrections of numbers, but today 2.5 million people are estimated to be affected by HIV. The interesting point about HIV is that it's quite a different kind of a disease than any other. One, it involves two people. Two, it involves a lot of issues which are very, very sensitive. Three, it involves a normative issue. Where the discussion is very private, very personal,
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's very difficult to bring this out in a public forum on a dialogue or a debate or an interaction. To come back to that question about why women and why rural women in particular. When it started in 86 and then it initially after the stages of denial, shame and scare and all that, when we came down to the fact that it's a disease, it's very much here and we need to understand, face and respond to it in a manner which is befitting and which is strategic from a mass communication perspective. It was initially thought to be an urban disease. It was initially even thought to be a Western disease. Somebody has brought it from the West. And also it was initially thought to be a disease of high-risk people. For example, commercial sex workers, drug users, men who have sex with men, migrants, truckers, and things like that. Now, in that framework, you see, women never occurred. Women in these 5 core categories, commercial sex workers were women. But they were from a high-risk group situation. And primarily they were urban, wherever there were brothels or where there were red light areas, so to say. How did it shift towards rural? Now, that's a very interesting phase of the disease which is crucial to understand. From urban to rural, from 86 to 2007 or 2008. Today you would be surprised that the ratio of the disease prevalence is 40% women.
Oh my God.
Which was initially thought that women are probably not the prime movers, women are not are victims, or women are probably even the conduit. But women in rural areas, now one would wonder, they do not fall into any of these categories. Why would the epidemic shift towards or have its impact on the rural side, and that to rural women? To understand this dynamics, you have to understand how HIV/AIDS moves or what fuels HIV. From high risk. Now, high risk means if you are talking about commercial sex workers, we are actually also talking about the clients of high risk commercial sex workers. Who are the clients of commercial sex workers? Probably, of course, men. Who are these men? These are the men who are probably within the same locale, or people who are actually migrants who work there, in that particular city or townships or capitals and small towns. They have come there for earning their livelihood.
Away from the home.
Away from the home.
To different cities.
So in some way or the other, the conditionalities as well as the situation in a way forces them, this is not to justify any behavioral issue, that they indulge in an indiscreet sexual activity. Now it is important to understand that all this activity is not in the safe domain. One, because of sexually transmitted diseases. Two, because they are not likely to use a condom. Three, it is done in a situation, let's say probably within the use of alcohol, where the possibility of using a safety measure is not going to be much on a higher level. Now, seasonally, these husbands or even unmarried young people will go back to their rural habitats. And when they go back to their rural habitats, they are also within the unaware situation. When they are unaware, they are taking back this STD or probably an HIV without having got tested to this issue back home.
And this has been happening down south and in many parts of the country.
That's
probably.
right, that's right.
And the increase of the quantum of increase has probably propelled communication experts like you and different agencies to reach out to this particular segment.
See, the data suggests a large part of this data comes from two sets. I think even in any production, whether it's radio or television, we need to know and track the data to be able to make a message correct. The three key data sets which the students may want to refer to and utilize in their analysis, one of them is of course the prevalence data. Prevalence means, prevalence is different than incidence data. Prevalence is done on certain specific sites every year. That actually tells you how many people are likely to be expected to be having HIV/AIDS virus. Second data is essentially about the behavioral surveillance survey, which actually tracks you. What do you know? What do you do? What is the kind of behavioral patterns you have as far as certain issues, for example, knowledge, awareness, practices about STDs, about condoms, about having sexual relationships and things, and of course about stigma and discrimination. Third set of data is about how do we look at care and support. How many people are positive, what do we do with them, how do we take their support, and what kind of provisioning of services and data, services as well as care and support issues are involved in that issue. Based on this data, you will see across the years, the disease seems to have moved from urban to rural, from high risk to general population, and it has covered almost the whole country.
I'll intervene for a minute. Recently there was a big controversy that the kind of the numbers that are being projected are far less as compared to what is given in the media. So what is your take on that?
Okay, let me clear it for once. There has been a revision of numbers. Please mark the word revision. It's not a revision because it has reduced. Last year the numbers were to the tune of 5.2 million. This year the numbers have been revised at 2.5 million.
Okay, the figure that you gave, 2.5, is a revised one.
Is a revised figure.
Earlier it was considered the 5.2 million.
Now let me clarify. Now this is not something to do with the epidemic has been halted, or a great success has been achieved. Yes, success has been achieved, but don't get it into this number. These numbers are essentially a methodological correction.
Okay.
Previously, a different kind of methodology was being used based on surveillance sites. This last year, National Family Health Survey was conducted, and on the basis of a large-scale sample, a revision in the methodology as well as the data collection was worked out between all the technical experts. And this is a very complex task. NACO, WHO, UNAIDS, several other technical experts came down to the fact that the numbers are 2.5 to be more realistic. But even if you look at 2.5 million, it's a huge number in reality. Now, the reality of HIV/AIDS is that it can actually spread even if it is in a small number. So-called high prevalence states, which are 6 states, 4 down south, 2 in the northeast, and rest of them are called nowadays reclassified as highly vulnerable states.
Can you list out these states?
Okay. Let me give you the 6 states which are classified as high prevalence states are 4 in the south, which means Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and in the northeast, Manipur and Nagaland. Now, there is a characteristics difference between the 4 states in the down south and 2 in the north. The primary mode of transmission of HIV in the southern states is due to sexual mode. As you know, there are 4 ways HIV spreads. So, 1 is sexual, 2 is contaminated blood, 3 is infected needles sharing and using, and 4th is from an infected mother to an unborn child, to her unborn child. The 2 states in the northeast, the primary mode of infection is drug use. Injection drug use.
In the northeast?
In the northeast. And then the south, the primary mode is sexual, in the sense that you are having unprotected sexual intercourse with people. To come down to that, within these, why the other states, which are so-called highly vulnerable states, what is important here is the workers who come from, let's say, Hyderabad or Mumbai or from Delhi go back to states which are in the north or even otherwise in the Middle East, middle of the country. So let's say Bihar, UP, all the northern states, Rajasthan, Delhi, Punjab, Haryana, Chandigarh, Orissa, MP and things like that. When they go back unintendedly, and sometimes because they are also not aware, they are having sexual relationship with their wives. So what happens is they pass on the disease to the woman. She is not able to question whether she should be asking for the husband to use a condom. Now, why do we want to focus on rural women is for 3 simple reasons. Can the woman in rural areas ask the husband that why don't we go for an HIV/AIDS test? Can she ask the husband that I would probably suggest that we use a condom? Can we ask that maybe were you faithful to me, or did you have any other relationship when you were away from me? Given these facts and the power dynamics and the gender dynamics in rural areas, the disease has spread to rural women.
What are these subcategories of women that you are trying to reach?
Okay, good.
Is it a monolith, all rural women, or there are some segregations between them, and why, if at all, why?
Okay, that's a good question. I think from media perspective or a program perspective, from radio as well as from television, it's important to understand who am I really addressing. Like you said, it's not a monolith. When you go back to rural, what will happen is you'll have married women, you'll have unmarried women, you'll have women who will have children, women who probably has been left alone, or probably the fact that she is currently expecting. So you'll have different age categories of women, you'll have different marital status of the woman, and these will form in a different situation of economics as well. Whether they are working, non-working, earning, non-earning may also add to whether they can negotiate what safe behavior may be. I'll cite an example from a radio program which NACO used to run, and I think it has probably come to an end and a new program is underway. The program was called Jeevan Hai Anmol, and I think it was broadcast on 24 different languages till December. We used to have very interesting case studies where women reaching out to women in rural areas used to be a question radio producers and radio script writers used to face very often. Now, how do I ask this question? What question do I ask? Do I intimidate men if I ask this question and empower women to ask this question? How do I relate to the fact that the wife may be also bound by the normative? that she cannot ask about sex, she cannot question any behavioral demands or requests from her husband because she is in a marital state. She has to take it lying down.
And I think you need to take men along with you. You just cannot leave them behind because they are as much involved in the entire problem. So how, how do you strike this kind of a balance?
Good.
In,
I think that's also very important. Sometimes when you work on women audience, you tend to forget that the involvement of men as well as certain other influentials and stakeholders like village community, the religious factors, opinion leaders, even panchayats and also elders in the family are important. Let me take the case of men. If you're going to address rural women who are wives or not wives, you'll have to address fathers, brothers or husbands. If you do not involve them, what will probably happen is probably a little of a backlash in the sense that you are asking the women to raise their voices, question their husbands or question their brothers or question their parents. Is this question going to be taken very pleasantly? Maybe not. So what you need to have men as partners also is that you need to involve in saying that, okay, after all, it's a partnership. In a partnership, both the people are supposed to be safe and enjoying their life. And if there is a question how women may ask this question, it is essentially for both of their welfare.
And their family's welfare as well.
At the end of the
children, unborn children probably.
Absolutely. If a man is infected with HIV and he intentionally or unintentionally, usually nobody does it intentionally, passes on the virus to the woman who is supposed to get pregnant, what will happen is the child will end up becoming positive.
Dr. Kumar, tell us specifically, how do we use radio? What is the media mix? What is the component of interpersonal communication? Because I am sure our students of audio production will be more interested to know how do we use a medium like radio and other media for a very, very sensitive issue so that they don't hurt the sensibilities of people. They reach out in an idiom, in a parlance which is understood by them, which makes meaning in their minds and which actually generates awareness and all the things that you are...
Good. I think that's a very important question. No medium in isolation works and gives you the impact which is desirable. Radio is one of the very important mediums, very particularly useful for rural women sector, because they listen to the radio quite often in their free time, in their times when men have gone to the fields or work and things like that. But let's not forget that if it is coming only from one medium, the impact or the assimilation or the understanding of that particular issue may be incomplete. So radio needs to be built probably on a larger pie of the whole programming mix in rural women's sector, but you need to have some buzz to be created by, let's say, television. But largely what I feel is that you need to have a lot of interpersonal communication as a follow-up. In rural health services, you have the ANM, the Anganwadi worker, now the ASHAs under the National Rural Health Mission. This trio involved with medical officer and multi-purpose health workers and block extension educators need to supplement the information which is fueled by the, let's say, radio discussion or listeners groups or the question banks or the interactions, call-ins and phone-ins you may have in radio.
Dr. Kumar, I have worked in the field. I have gone to the rural areas and all these segments, especially the government segment that you are referring to, ANMs, LMPVs and things like that. I was watching them very, very closely. That was quite some time back when I did my PhD. Nonetheless, I have realized that these segments all, they have a little less credibility among the people. Or probably I should be saying that even in our communication strategies, whenever we talked about reproductive health, people said, oh, nasbandi wali bhenji aa gayi. So how do you counter this kind of inbuilt fear in the mind of the people or, the little problems that they have? I
can understand. I think there is a baggage which we carry back from 60s, 70s, 80s or even 90s about family planning issues related to coercive issues, something like that. But I think over the period, there there has been a much more effort from the side of the government as well as from the NGOs, the community radios, the interactive radios, and the fact that there are examples and case studies by which women's groups, SHG groups, have run a radio station.
Yes,
Now,
that's important.
it's important that we involve as many people as possible directly, but nonetheless, the government sector functionary image is also changing because they have been sensitized to how to talk to an adolescent girls, for that matter, how to differentiate the discussion between a married woman and an unmarried woman, and how to even involve the mother-in-laws, for example. Now, I think it's very important for any radio production or any functionary who's going to follow up and do the IPC to understand how you need to talk differently and how you need to talk in phases. A program, whether it's in a radio magazine format or in a docudrama format or in any other news format, news magazine format, needs to have a complementarity with not only with the other media users but also between radio and IPC. And I think all stakeholders, including religious leaders, panchayat leaders, self-help groups, youth clubs, teachers for that matter, and also any other elder groups which are available. There are panchayats, there are groups whose word is listened to, and village health committees are there. It's important that we engage them when the program is on. It is important that we ask them to call in. It's important that we ask them to share information after the program is over. You know, I think the interactivity issue has to be looked at by the functionary who is working in the field. Not to forget one more issue, I think, which is important. How do I know whether my program is working?
Absolutely.
How do I measure whether what has been telling has been received very well, has been assimilated well, and has been acted upon? At the end of the day, the communications job is not just about transmission and broadcast of messages. And I'm sure the listeners and the students would be very, very interested to know, how do I know whether I've done a good job? How do I know whether the radio program has made a difference? How do I know whether what I have said has been received and acted upon?
The way it was intended.
Absolutely.
Because there is a whole lot of gap
between what I say and what you see. Saying and seeing are two different things. And I think this is where a very important task of in-building or building it from beginning some indicators, some measurement tools and techniques which gives you an impression of whether you are on the right track, whether the reception is correct, or whether there is a distortion which is happening in construction, transmission and reception. And if there is a feedback loop which is available. Now, I think sometimes we forget that. There are lots of interesting new techniques, tools like, the diaries have been used before, the phone-ins have been used before, the prize letters or prize questions have been used many times. And sometimes a new way I think recently was introduced was, how do we make the rural women the reporter itself?
Okay.
Instead of hiring a reporter or having a trained reporter go back and come back with a story, we have intended, and some other program producers and agencies have tried a new way of looking at, is that they train rural women, young women as reporters themselves. So what happens is it adds a value of ownership and authenticity. Because this girl used to live in my village next door till yesterday. Now she's the one who is asking me this question with this little mic, and she's in her own language, her own dialect, her own style. Sometimes it may be a little difficult, but if you give them a basic training, it helps a lot. So even that helps a lot in authenticating. And if along with that, the health functionary plus the other stakeholders and opinion leaders join the gang, it's a great way of learning that your message, because this girl is going to go back to the community. People are going to come back to her. She becomes a resource center. She becomes an information point where they come back to learn, to ask, to clarify whatever questions they may have.
So there could be a ripple effect in the lives of these rural women also who are going out as reporter, and maybe a little bit of empowerment in their own lives because they are realizing their own potential in.
Absolutely. I think the new way of engaging the audience itself as reporters or researchers is a very interesting way of looking at it. Same has been used in video production, same has been used in some other situations like doing, let's say, folk media, puppet shows and street plays. You empower them to do their own stuff. You empower them to ask their own questions because it will be contextually more relevant, it will be easily understood and easily identified with. And of course they become the point of feedback for you also, because now you know what you are not only getting in construction, in transmission, but post-transmission, because these girls are going to be an interactive tool which is always available to you. So your reception also is not fake but authentic, because what you're getting from feedback from or kind of a dipstick study from is same community woman who has now become your researcher and reporter. So I think one needs to try certain new ways of looking back to reach out, to engage, and also to find out whether your impact and your influence has been real.
And make it very, very broad-based, because the kind of stakeholders that you have referred to, involving so many people from the community, the religious leaders and the panchayats and things like that.
Participation needs to be broad. Kiranji, what I want to say is participation needs to be as broad-based as possible. But sometimes the issue needs to be a little bit more focused. Now, talking about condoms, for example, condom negotiation, or let's say, for example, talking about interpersonal discussion between husband and wife, or sometimes the even more sensitive issue about talking about STDs by an unmarried woman. Now, these are important discussions to take care of. So I think it's important that we engage rural women within their context and within their relevance, within their language, and within their issues and concerns they face.
Dr. Sanjay Kumar, I go back to the states that you were referring to, because a certain pattern has emerged from the various states that you have mentioned. But I don't find any of the Bimaru states here. Neither Bihar, UP, Rajasthan and all these Hindi-speaking areas, which suffer a great deal. You are a health communicator yourself. And these states are, facing a whole lot of health-related problems. And this, polio is there, and especially this pulse polio campaign. I'll come to that later. But why is that you don't have any of these states in the high-risk zones?
Okay. That's a good question. I think it's important to realize that sometimes a low prevalence, overall state-wise low prevalence masks the situation in the state.
But they are also migrating in larger numbers.
They're true. What happens is,
and UP, they are,
So to tell you the fact, that what happens is the 4 states in the south and 2 states in the northeast, the epidemic has reached, by definition, if you cross certain limit in STDs, no, there is a technical definition to why they are called high prevalence, which will basically mean that if the STD prevalence in the population has crossed 5% and ANC has crossed, with antenatal care, the pregnant woman, the prevalence has crossed 1%, then it becomes a high prevalence state. In the states which you're mentioning, it may not be they have crossed 5% or 1%. That does not mean that the numbers are small.
Problem is not there.
And within that, there is another issue which I think the audience and the students will good to know is that there are districts which are classified as high prevalence within the low prevalence states also. So there are about 140 districts across the country which are classified as A category districts. These districts, irrespective of whether they are in the 4th, down south, or 2 in the northeast, are high prevalent states, high prevalent districts, and some of them are available or are there in the states which you mentioned. So this means probably the migration patterns are very high. Probably the service statistics are very bad. Probably illiteracy and poverty is another cause of the less knowledge as well as high prevalence. But I think important thing is that if we communicate to men and women and other stakeholders who actually form the normative, engage them, it will be important, it will be useful and sometimes very, very productive so that people can talk, people can dialogue, people can discuss and find solutions for themselves. And in the end, rural women's issue will be taken care of, otherwise suffering in silence and keeping the belief that I am not at risk because I am married will go away. Marriage is seen as a safety. But marriage sometimes can be a little bit of a problem if you do not have, if you do not question the possibility of risk within the marriage, because you have been faithful, because you have been monogamous.
How about the youth? You have talked about women, and do you, undertake or follow different kind of strategies for reaching out to the youth, or they are similar in nature? And what kind of programming is aimed at the youth?
I think that's an entire whole different topic.
Oh, really?
Maybe we'll take it next time. Youth's communication for HIV is a challenge even today. There are so many different factors which affect youth risk perception, whether it's urban or rural, or whether it's migratory or working or educated or non-educated, things like that. It's a whole topic in itself. But I think the major issue in youth and HIV is still a challenge. A lot of interventions have been done, and a lot needs to be done, because we need to look at new intervention models for young people.
Does it mean that it is easier to reach out to women, rural women, but difficult to reach out to men, and that to you?
It may sound little amusing, but to tell you the truth, you see, first of all, young people are very difficult to make them sit together and discuss and talk. It may sound a little funny. Second, their attention levels of listening to one thing and a longer period is very small. 3, they think they know.
So there is this inherent blockade to
I know,
ideas.
and they have lots of channels which supposedly reach them. So they hear it and they feel they know, but they really don't. And the second factor, which is a very, very difficult factor, maybe I'll analyze it for you next time, is this question called "I am not at risk."
Yes, this
in the rural women's situation, the "I am not at risk" is because I'm married. When you are married, usually still in Indian situation, traditional conservative beliefs and practices prevail. Women do not generally graze around, as they call it in Uganda. But
this
young
is an
people.
expression in
well,
Uganda.
the ABC strategy, if you remember, we talked about in one of the previous program, was ABC means abstinence, be faithful, or use a condom if you cannot be A and B.
Talking about these 3 focal areas, have you ever countered or faced any kind of a problem in the rural areas? Because given the situation and our socio-cultural fabric, especially in the rural areas, and how do you counter that?
I think it's a very pertinent question. Using an ABC strategy along with other offshoots of the newer dimensions in rural areas, sometimes it's a little difficult. See, technically speaking, A is meant for young people, abstinence. Where you are, if you are not a sexually active person, then you probably use A. Be faithful is a very, very useful strategy in urban as well as in rural, probably more useful in rural situations with rural women, because and as an offshoot, what had happened in one of the experiments which we're doing in Hyderabad was we were talking to married women in and around in AP in Hyderabad. And we came across this question and a need, we were writing a manual as well as a radio production. They said, what's the point in talking to me and telling me? You see, I know this, but do you expect me to ask this question when I go back or when my husband come back from 6 months after work?
I was about to ask you, because once you said that you can reach out to women, rural women, probably they are receptive, they will hear you out and they will keep some of the information and maybe forget the rest. But among the youth, you are facing a whole lot of problems.
Right.
So isn't it a similar kind of situation is appearing in which, it is easier to, control the, reproductive health of women, the whole gamut of issues which were happening in 70s and 80s.
Right. No, I think let's take the perspective. It's not that the onus of prevention is shifting to women. No, I don't think so. What is shifting is that the need and the right for the women to know and act upon. In this case, the whole issue, for example, even certain new contraceptive technologies are being introduced where the choice of safety lies in her hand. Now, she is the one who will decide whether I wear it or you wear it, because I am a little skeptical. So what happens is, I will take the decision, or I will have the right to say no. Now, that is an empowering strategy and not a shifting of onus of responsibility. Now, if you give her a logic and skills, or life skills, or negotiation skills, not be in a combative mode. Now, and similarly work upon the male counterpart, so that, he does not see that as something which is threatening.
So the answer lies in empowering women, giving them
And
this
engaging
choice,
men.
engaging men also, so that they are not left behind in this entire discussion.
And they see this as a partnerships issue.
So that is probably we can, our students can take up as some of the cues for their own programs for radio, and how to build all these, issues that
Dimensions of the issue and the problem. I think one small little thing I would like to mention is that whichever format of the radio program may be, whether it's a magazine format or a docudrama format or even a jingle for that matter, I think it's important the message, if you are addressing rural women, needs to be sensitive. Especially gender sensitive. One tends to, as you rightly pointed out, you may actually sound like you are shifting the responsibility to women. Please don't. It is an equity issue. You are equally responsible for your own as well as your partner's safety. In this case, I have an equal right to ask and question if I feel that my safety is being compromised. And also, if you work and engage men, they must also realize that the questioning is not just a combative mode, but it is essentially because she cares. So both sides are important.
You were talking about different formats. Which formats could be, in your opinion, considering your vast experience in the field, is more useful for this kind of work?
I think Jeevan and Mole had a kind of a radio magazine kind of a format, which had certain segments, and one of the segments used to be 5 to 7 minutes of, let's say, a small episodic docudrama. Because I think life instances, real life case studies and scenarios are very, very important to highlight how it was applied or constructed in a real life scenario. Within that, I think another format was used, which I said about using young researchers themselves and going into the field and asking questions from women and families and groups of, let's say,
citizen reporters.
Citizen reporters.
Not journalists.
Participatory citizen reporters. I think the third engagement is something using popular media. Some of the jingles which we created in the process was using not a typical messagey, technical messagey kind of a thing. If I remember correctly, we used a format which was a qawwali, and also not very direct, probably very subtle. I think it goes like that. If I can give you a humming of one line, it might be useful to understand that. Because the sensitivity of the nature, and see how a touch of a qawwali is used in a jingle, which makes it much more listenable and also recallable. It used to go like that. Baat mushkil bhi hai, aasan bhi hai. So it goes into that mode where if you listen to in tune, it actually feels like a qawwali. You can hum it, you can sing it, and when you say baat mushkil bhi hai, aasan bhi hai, you can sing it actually. But and without saying HIV फैलता है ऐसे, HIV फैलता है नहीं ऐसे, kind of a thing, you do not have to be very, very upfront, technically upfront. Bring in the message later. But I think if you use people's language, popular formatting, it becomes much more useful, especially where people need to recall it, remember it later. Nobody is going to say HIV ऐसे फैलता है ऐसे नहीं फैलता, that's okay. But use a popular format, use a popular tune, use a popular construct, whether it is in docudrama, whether it is in even in online question or quiz format, or the fact that you are having a technical medical person to come in and talk about HIV and things like that. If you can use in a popular cinema or in an FM situation or even in a song, it will probably be much more easier to digest, remember and act upon.
And how to guard against media overkill? Because that is also at the other end of the spectrum. You have a whole lot of programs and different formats and kind of dimming the message of this.
Media overkill in this situation, there can be never media overkill in this situation,
Okay.
you know.
You don't foresee any such
The
kind of
situation is grave enough.
Okay.
And as much we are able to do, probably will be lesser. If you see the larger impacts of HIV in economic impacts, in social impacts, in relationship impacts, there will never be a media overkill. The only, I think, the point of discussion or something which you need to take care of is don't become boring. As is probably, don't become so messagey, preachy, technical oriented that people will feel that, oh my God, I don't want to listen to this is so boring. If you make it entertaining, if you make it educative, if you make it interesting, engaging, it'll probably be always much better, because there are so many angles and aspects and case studies when you go down to work in the field in HIV, especially with women, especially with rural women. I think it is never enough. Given the fact that in some of the states you mentioned, the awareness level is still even at 10%, 15%, 4%, 11%. So I think there's never an overkill. If you can come up with interesting, exciting ideas on radios, probably do it more. Probably do it even more. And it will be useful.
But guard against that fine line between entertainment and interesting. How to make it interesting is fine, but not to get into the realm of entertainment per se.
Well, the approach now they call infotainment has gone into enter-educate.
Okay.
Entertainment with education. Now, where exactly you are saying a message, in a way, don't make a mess of the message.
Okay.
Like there is a mess in message. So if you don't make a mess of a message, and if your message is having an age, in the sense categorization, the message will go down well. And also allow people to participate. If you have channels, deliberately create channels where you can engage them. They can reach back to you, they can question you, they can ask elaboration you. And that is where I think what you mentioned initially was, what happens after the transmission of the program is over, what happens after that as an interactive follow-up, as an IPC follow-up is very, very important. Don't leave that alone.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar. Thanks a lot. You have covered a wide gamut of issues in your presentation, and I do hope that it has, thrown open a number of ideas for our students which they can pick on, which they can take forward and use imaginatively and more credibly in their communication strategy. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
And we do hope that our students have found it extremely informative as well. Thank you very much.
कोलकाता, कलिकाता या कलकत्ता, आप इसे कुछ भी नाम दें, इसके नाम मात्र से एक ऐसे नगर की छवि जहन में उभरती है जिसका एक समृद्ध इतिहास है। 3 शताब्दी पहले कोलकाता एक छोटा सा गांव होता था, जो इस कालावधि में भारत के सबसे बड़े शहरों में से एक बन गया है। कोलकाता का पुराना नाम कलिकाता था, जो उन 3 गांवों में से एक था जिन्हें जॉब चारनाक ने ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी के कारोबार के लिए चुना था। कोलकाता सन 1911 तक भारत की राजधानी रहा। तब भारत पर अंग्रेजों का शासन था। कोलकाता में ढेर सी ऐसी इमारतों और स्मारकों को देख कोई हैरानी नहीं होती, जो आज भी औपनिवेशिक काल की यादें ताजा कर देते हैं। ऐसा ही एक स्थान है विक्टोरिया मेमोरियल। ब्रिटिश हुकूमत के दौरान भारत के वायसरॉय लॉर्ड कर्जन ने क्वीन विक्टोरिया को श्रद्धांजलि देने के लिए विक्टोरिया मेमोरियल बनवाया था। जनवरी 1906 को किंग जॉर्ज पंचम ने इसकी नींव रखी थी। वे उस समय प्रिंस ऑफ वेल्स थे। 28 दिसंबर 1921 को किंग एडवर्ड अष्टम ने इस पूरी इमारत को क्वीन को समर्पित कर दिया। मेमोरियल को देखकर इटालवी और यूनानी शिल्प के प्रति अंग्रेजों का झुकाव स्पष्ट नजर आता है। इसके गुंबद इस्लामी शैली के हैं। विक्टोरिया मेमोरियल को बनाने में जिस संगमरमर का इस्तेमाल किया गया है, उसका कुछ हिस्सा राजस्थान स्थित मकराना की उन्हीं खानों से आया है, जहां से ताजमहल के लिए संगमरमर आया था। गुंबद के ऊपर 16 फुट लंबी कांसे की बनी स्टैचू ऑफ विक्ट्री को बॉल बेयरिंग की मदद से लगाया गया है। जब तेज हवा चलती है तो ये घूमती है। गार्डन ऑफ मेमोरियल को 338 गुना 228 वर्ग फुट क्षेत्र में बनाया गया है। उत्तरी दरवाजे की तरफ जाते हुए क्वीन विक्टोरिया की कांसे की बनी प्रतिमा नजर आती है। क्वीन अपने सिंहासन पर बैठी हैं। दक्षिण दिशा से इस इमारत की ओर बढ़ते हुए किंग एडवर्ड सप्तम की कांसे की बनी प्रतिमा है। विक्टोरिया मेमोरियल में भारत में बनी ऑयल पेंटिंग्स का शानदार संग्रह मौजूद है। इन चित्रों को 1770 से 1835 के बीच यूरोप के कुछ बेहद प्रख्यात कलाकारों ने बनाया। कोलकाता शहर के आरंभिक काल को थॉमस डैनियल की पेंटिंग्स में देखा जा सकता है। कलकत्ता गैलरी में खास तौर पर इस शहर के इतिहास और विकास को दर्शाया गया है और इसे अवश्य देखना चाहिए। विक्टोरिया विक्टोरिया से चलते हैं अब राइटर्स बिल्डिंग की तरफ, जिसमें फिलहाल पश्चिम बंगाल सरकार का सचिवालय है। ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी के जूनियर राइटर या क्लर्क यहां रहा करते थे। यहां क्योंकि लेखक रहते थे, इसलिए इसका नाम राइटर्स बिल्डिंग पड़ गया। राइटर्स बिल्डिंग का निर्माण 1780 में हुआ था, लेकिन इसके भव्य कोरिंथियन अग्रभाग का निर्माण 1889 में ही हुआ। इसके लंबे लंबे स्तंभ, मेहराबदार गलियारे और इसके मध्य में स्थित पवेलियन इस इमारत को गोथिक शिल्प कला का बेजोड़ नमूना बनाती हैं। यहां 4 मूर्तियां मौजूद हैं जो प्रतीक रूप में विज्ञान, खेती, वाणिज्य तथा न्याय को दर्शाती हैं। जिस जगह आज राइटर्स बिल्डिंग मौजूद है, वहां से कभी औपनिवेशिक गतिविधियों का संचालन हुआ करता था। यहां आसपास ही हाईकोर्ट, गवर्नर हाउस और प्रसिद्ध तालाब लाल दिघी मौजूद है। विक्टोरिया मेमोरियल वास्तव में कलकत्ता की एक खास पहचान है।